So good morning, and thank you very much for having me. My name is Mark Grannan. I'm an analyst with Forrester Research, and I'm really glad to be back here in DC. I love this town. And thank you, Jahia, for having me. So what I want to talk about today is customer experience. In fact, I want to talk about why customer experience. We teased this out a little bit. In fact, this is the same data that Emmanuel just described a moment ago, presented slightly differently. This is a Watermark Consulting Study conducted from 2007 to 2014, looking at a portfolio of CX leaders and a portfolio of CX laggards, measuring their stock performance over that 7-year term. And it's pretty clear here that the CX leaders outperform the market dramatically. Emmanuel's slide showed the same thing. And the laggards underperform the market dramatically. Now this is true, which is great, but the problem with a portfolio analysis is that when you crack open the portfolio, individual stocks don't necessarily align to this same trend line. Now why that's troubling is because when you look at certain key outliers, you start to question the methodology itself. So for example, within the CX leaders category, we actually have a few negative spots that are noteworthy. So first, in 2007, Borders drops by 50%, and a few years later, goes out of business. And in 2014, JCPenney drops by more than 50%. Not necessarily because JCPenney has a bad customer experience strategy, but pricing strategies and competitive landscape challenges are pushing on their business model as well. And maybe even scarier are the notion that CX laggards can outperform the market by 110%. Here's US healthcare provider Cigna. Or Comcast in 2013, up 60%. So you might be wondering, why poke holes in your own data? Well, we have a quest here to understand the real relationship of customer experience and business success. In fact, that is the question we want to answer today. That is the question we've been trying to answer for the better part of 2 decades in our customer experience research. So in order to do that, we actually need to define these 2 terms, customer experience and business success. So customer experience actually is an entire practice for Forrester. Harley Manning, research director, has led this team for the better part of 20 years. And the methodology they've come up with is called the Customer Experience Index. And it's a way to measure the quality of the experiences you deliver today. And it's a way to benchmark that quality against your competitors. And then once you have that benchmark, you're able to model the investment against improvements in customer experience. How well will this move the needle on impacting our business? And if we can do all that by standing on the shoulders of the 3 E's of customer experience, which are effectiveness, does it actually deliver the value we expect? Is it easy? Do we reduce friction in a customer process? And is it emotional? Are we actually enjoying the experience so much we go and tell a friend or a colleague or a loved one? If we can nail those 3 E's, we're going to drive customer loyalty. I think we all get this, and as Emmanuel mentioned, this is somewhat intuitive. Both as humans and as business leaders, we kind of get this. But it drives loyalty at 3 levels. First, retention loyalty. Are we going to keep the customers we have today? Second, enrichment loyalty. Can we get them to spend more with us? And lastly, advocacy loyalty. Can we get them so excited about the brand experience that they're going to help us get new customers? Okay, so this is a really high-level view on the Customer Experience Index. And it's a large format study Forrester has invested a lot of resources in. We have this score for multiple brands across multiple geographies and multiple industries, where we can slice and dice this data. So if we have this in our back pocket, and we can now determine leaders and laggards within a specific industry, well, then we have to go back to our original question. Does customer experience drive business success? And the answer is, it doesn't for stock performance. The correlation is not tight enough to actually merit our investment here. But we can start to look at other data. We can start to sift through the noise amongst the data. And what is that noise? Well, first off, it's bubbles bursting. The dot-com bubble, the real estate bubble, or maybe it's the fear of rising interest rates. Here's Janet Yellen, Federal Reserve Chairman, excuse me. And also, we have to start to question, what is a business? What is a brand? Because I've already mentioned one, Comcast, who, on the face of it, who here thinks of a cable company? Okay, most of us, right? Probably those who are from the US. It's a telephone, cable, and video subscription service. But actually, when you look at it, that stock symbol represents 5 companies. And you can't tease apart the stock performance of the cable company from a theme park or a movie studio. So if that's the case, we actually need to look for a new metric. Because honestly, looking at stock performance, unless you're really lucky or really careful, you're going to end up with a whole lot of bull. Pun very much intended for the stock market folks in the room. So we need that new metric. And how did Forrester come up with that? Well, we asked you. We asked 3,000 business leaders, what are your top priorities over the next 12 months? And he said, pick 5 out of a really long list. You know what they came back and told us? Revenue. Revenue is the first, followed very closely by customer experience. Now, if we treat revenue as our new replacement for stock market performance, and now that we know how to measure customer experience very accurately at a large scale, across industries, and within specific geographies, now we need a methodology. Because we still haven't answered this question. We still haven't answered what is the direct correlation. So our customer experience research has built a methodology which allows us to focus on leaders and laggards. And we still haven't really defined what a leader and a laggard is, right? If we look at our data, or if you kind of intuitively think about a specific vertical, or vertical within a geography, and say, who's doing this really well and who's not doing so hot these days? And we have the numbers to back this up. And you select direct competitors with the extreme differences in customer experience quality. And then we look at their revenue, because we can inspect their balance sheet. We do some forensic accounting here, start slicing and dicing, making sure we back out acquisitions and the like. And then we trend that over time. We actually now have our methodology to track customer experience revenue as it ties to leaders and laggards over time. So, if we now have our methodology, let's apply this to a real-world example. Let's look back at Comcast, our favorite example here. And for those of us in the US, you might actually kind of get the punchline of comparing Comcast to a customer experience case study. For those of you who aren't from the US, they actually have some fantastically bad customer experience track records. This was from 2006. This is a picture that went viral. A Comcast customer returns home to find the Comcast technician asleep on his couch. This was the 3rd visit to repair a broken internet modem. And after he still couldn't solve the broken modem, he calls Central Tech Support. Central Tech Support puts him on hold for the better part of 2 hours, wherein he falls asleep on the couch, and lo and behold, the customer comes home to this. Now, when this goes viral, now it just is, everyone chuckles, right? There's so many different examples of Comcast doing this poorly. And our data backs this up. They're right there at the bottom of pretty much all the businesses they're in from a customer experience index standpoint. So they're the laggard in this scenario. Well, let's look for a leader in some of the businesses they compete in. And we have one. AT&T Uverse does pretty well in internet and video subscriber businesses. And if we compare them on the revenue basis from 2010 to 2014, we can see a 30% delta. AT&T Uverse is doing really well here compared to a really slow-growing Comcast. Well, what actually explains this? What's driving the revenue growth? Well, in both businesses, the customer growth is pretty dramatic for AT&T Uverse, whereas it's borderline flat or almost negative for Comcast in the video space. So if we're looking at a specific set of competitors with a dramatic difference in customer experience quality, we can now dig into the revenue and understand the correlation. Let's not just pick on Comcast. Let's not just go to the US. Let's look at a British example. So over in the UK, we actually find out, and I'm not totally familiar with this company, but some of you all in the room might be, that you have your own version of Comcast. It's called TalkTalk. TalkTalk is a mobile and broadband subscription service provider, and they had their own snafu last year. In fact, they had a privacy breach. Some of their data was stolen. Customer data was stolen. And this is the CEO, Dido Harding. And in response to this data breach, which honestly is somewhat excusable in today's climate, we don't honestly have all the protections in place, but the response is what's important. And I'd highly encourage you to go look up this YouTube video after the fact, but I'll try to summarize it here. In short, she goes to say, we've had a data breach, which we're working as fast as we can to repair and understand the full impact of this data breach on your financial safety. And if in the meantime you can prove you've been financially harmed due to a hacker breach and TalkTalk is at fault, then we'll, on a case-by-case basis, give you clearance to terminate your account penalty-free. We'll waive the cancellation fee. Very magnanimous, right? I mean, that's a customer experience, just not necessarily a good one. And as a result, we've seen some pretty dramatic changes in terms of loss of customers and revenue. But now we need to compare them again against a competitor in their vertical, in their geography, that is a leader. Luckily, we have Sky. And here's where some forensic accounting comes in. We were able to back out the pieces of the business that shouldn't be compared. So we're looking at UK subscriber business. We compare it to TalkTalk, and then we were actually pretty generous on TalkTalk regarding acquisitions, because they actually acquired some customers. And you look at revenue against these two in 2010, 2014, and 3.9 to 0.4. So again, Sky is outperforming here. And why are they outperforming? They're outperforming because their customer base is growing faster. So now we have this pattern. Revenue, customer experience index, built on the back of things like subscriber growth. And we have actually repeated this in multiple industries. I think you saw on the slide that Emmanuel provided. There was a German banking example, which we'll come back to. There's retail for sure. We have this in North America, Europe, and Asia across many verticals. So if we have this pattern, we still haven't really answered the question, what explains the findings? Because right now we're just finding some things that map together. Now we need to explain it. And in order to do that, we actually need to remind ourselves what we already kind of know. Some from our data, so some from the customer experience index data. It proves mathematically through correlation and regression analysis that customer experience drives customer loyalty. Actually, and we've already gone through this, right? It's 3 types of loyalty. It's retention, it's enrichment, and it's advocacy loyalty. So these flavors of loyalty we can mathematically attribute to customer experience. Now, if we can do that, and then we can intuitively know that loyalty translates into revenue, and as business leaders or as individuals, we get this, then we can say customer experience drives revenue when customer loyalty drives revenue. But there's a catch, because there has to be two key factors involved to make this assumption true. The first is customers have to be free. They have to be able to move to a competitor. And they also have to experience differentiation in those experiences. If they can't tell the difference from one to the next, it won't necessarily work. So this is a lot of words on a slide. To better tell it, we should look at a 2x2. We love our 2x2s, I'm sure you do as well. But on the vertical axis is customers. How free are they? They might be trapped. They can't move. They're stuck in a contract. Or they're absolutely free. There is zero friction between them and a competitor. Now, on the horizontal axis, this is the competitive CX landscape. Now, on the left-hand side, it's all equal. Parity, across the board, really hard to distinguish. And on the right-hand side, differentiated. So now we can actually ask our question in a very visual way. Does customer experience drive revenue growth? And if you find yourself in this bottom left-hand corner where customers are trapped, and even if they could move, they wouldn't really experience much difference, there's no real benefit to them anyways, then no, it doesn't. But as you move up and to the right, then yes, customers can move and they can experience a difference, a benefit when they do make that move. So let's make this real. Let's go back to our example, right? We were talking about cable companies. And in the early days, cable companies would have been down here, bottom left. Heavy infrastructure, long contracts, it's all the same content anyways. But in the past couple of decades, we've seen advances in technology. The cable companies themselves become content companies. We see the rise of new content companies. We see cord cutters. All of a sudden, they move to the right. It's heavily differentiated between the competitors, especially within the North American market, for example. And certainly, customers are getting freer to move because of things like Netflix. So with that in mind, let's think about other industries. And we kind of tipped our hand here earlier. We had ING DiBa in Germany versus Commerzbank in Germany. So German retail banks. And for a number of reasons around Germany, and German citizens being very decisive on choosing leaders and laggards, because remember this is built off CXI data, we can see that there is a heavy degree of differentiation in German retail banking. And allows us to peg the market and the analysis there, and that's what you saw earlier, wherein ING DiBa outperforms Commerzbank. But let's say UK banking is a better comparison. Actually, there's less differentiation there, so there's less reason for those customers to move. So if there's less reason for them to move, we have to start factoring that into our analysis of how much we invest in customer experience, which we'll get to in a minute. But the tricky part isn't maybe these scenarios. It's probably most dramatically embodied in retail. And who here would even try to deny that retail is absolutely fluid today? We could all shop right now from our phones. We could be 2 a.m. on our couch on a tablet. It's not what retailer you're near or who you can visit. Pretty much all of those barriers have been wiped off the map by e-commerce. So if we start to understand how does CX drive revenue growth, retail is probably the most in the green here, whereas the other three are yellow. They're yes with some caveats. And that's kind of the whole picture here. We're going to start to map our industry and our company on this 2x2. So we have some options, right? We are at a point in time where we can say, what do we want to do about this whole customer experience thing? Well, we're going to help you answer that with 3 quick questions. The first question is all about mapping yourself. So remember that 2x2. We need now to look at and think about how easy is it for our customers to move between us and a competitor. How much friction is there in that market? How many contracts are in place? How many other barriers to entry are there? How regulated is our industry, perhaps? And if we can do that, and then also look at the CXI data, or maybe we just intuitively know this, where we are on this scale of leaders and laggards, and determine are there outliers, so we can definitively say here's good and here's less good. Then we can go on to step 2. as we know where we are on this map. And on step 2, we have to be a little bit honest with ourselves. The first question is all about how we make money. Now, I don't know about you, but if your business model has been to exploit trapped customers for any number of years or decades, potentially the move to a customer experience leadership model where you're going to give them value could be a little bit challenging. Not impossible, but challenging. And if you can answer yes to this question, you have to answer, how well can we innovate? How can we compete in that market now? Because it is a competitive market. And in order to compete, we have to be able to do things like experimentation. We have to reframe customer problems and rally our company behind us. Now that's a loaded question to be sure, and it's all about innovation in the context of customer experience, a whole nother stream of research. But we have to honestly answer the question whether or not we can compete and how well we can innovate and outperform our competition. So now we know where we are and we need a strategy, right? We actually need a customer experience strategy. There's hundreds of these, but let's pick 3. Well, the first one is what if you're up here, top left? Customers are free to move, but everything's kind of the same. What should you do? Forrester actually advocates that you break from the pack. This is your chance to steal customers because you are differentiating your experience. This is what Emmanuel was mentioning earlier. If your competition isn't doing so much and you have an opportunity to surge ahead, you should seize that opportunity. Perfect moment. Now, what if you happen to be differentiated and totally free? Top right. Remember I said retail is an example of this? Well, actually, we say dominate a segment. And for those of us who are US-based, financial services is pretty crowded right now, especially with the rise of online financial services. So if you're going to do wealth planning, maybe you should do what Edward Jones has done. Go after the 7 million customers who don't want to do online investing. Absolutely don't want it. They want face-to-face. You get to know them the best, better than anyone else in the market. And you say that we're going to know this market, we're going to be the best service provider we can, which allows us to own this segment. Pretty actually good strategy for them, very profitable. Or you happen to find yourself trapped in a parity. You're in one of those regulated or geographically constrained industries wherein your customers can't move. We actually advocate that you ride the disruption. And I'll table that for a second because you could, in theory, you could defend the action of inaction. You could say the strategy, we're not going to do anything because our customers are trapped, and if they could, they wouldn't experience any benefit anyways. There's a few other reasons why you might actually invest. Who here thinks that reducing customer call center load could be advantageous for your brand? All right, good. It's going to drop your cost to serve, right? Cost of care will come down. Your profitability will go up. That has nothing really to do with the customer experience motivation. You're trying to be more profitable here. So if you can invest appropriately today as the market demands and be ready to move, because it will move, you will be disrupted. If you aren't in retail or finance or some of these other industries that are very clear examples of disruption, you will be eventually. Get ready to move and ride this disruption. You'll be ready to be the company to beat as you move up and to the right. So an example might be Delta Airlines. Delta, in fact, was probably closer up and to the left. But they said our customers could move to another large US airline like United, but we're going to focus on reducing our cancellation rate. They went from 2% to 0.3% in a couple of years. They became the cancellation leader within the US domestic airlines. And so as they break out, they actually are crossing paths with this other trajectory. So it's a combination of two strategies going forward. And so we can see here there's so many options, and it's all about building awareness first, but then taking action. So if I can get you to remember nothing else from this talk, it's certainly that customer experience drives revenue when customer loyalty drives revenue. But customer revenue growth requires free customers. Remember the whole dynamic that they have to be free to move, and there has to be differentiation in the customer experience within a specific industry. And then lastly, it's all about riding that disruption. It can free customers. As your industry moves out of that bottom left, your customers will be free to move, and a disruptive competitor will steal your customers. Be ready to be the one stealing those customers. So those 3 points now actually give a great segue to a lot of the research that we do around digital experience. And I'll just give a teaser before I hand it over to Ellie. But the teaser is that we can't forget about the journey our customers are on every day. And we have to look at every step along that journey. We mentioned the moments, or the points in time that make up a customer's journey. Those moments, more and more often on a mobile device, typically broke down like this. We were focused, a lot of us here who are digital marketers or e-commerce leaders, we were dead set focused on these type of moments. Too often, the moments on the back half of that life cycle got forgotten or deprioritized. And certainly if we're in a product company, we weren't too sure how to factor in the product moments into this life cycle. But if we take customer experience as a whole end-to-end discipline, and if our industry happens to be along that trajectory wherein we need to differentiate our customer experience to win, serve, and retain customers, we need to understand all of these moments. Every moment needs to be stitched together holistically so that we can then better serve those customers in a moment of need, because we up our IQ on the context of that customer. And so with that, I think I'll hand over to Ellie to take us into the next section.